And we begin tonight with Alix Rosenthal, who is a political activist in San Francisco. She's worked on Capitol Hill as a legislative aide for Senator Boxer. She's been president of the San Francisco Elections Commission, a graduate of University of Virginia Law School, and presently the president of the National Women's Political Caucus. Okay, good.
The San Francisco chapter.
San Francisco chapter.
Yeah.
We had Paula Park recently from Korn Kerry, #1 recruiting firm, and we were asking her a lot of questions about women executive placement. And you know, I watched that interview a couple times. I had to because I was editing it, and I never got a handle on it. I don't think it was altogether positive, but I don't think it was altogether negative. Is that where things are? That you can't characterize as either black or white. You're sort of making gains, but maybe not. In San Francisco and the Bay Area,
I think we've come a long way in the last several decades, but we've slid backwards recently, particularly locally. For example, only 2 out of the 11 supervisors are women. You know, we are more than 50% of the voting population. It's inexcusable. Only 1 out of our citywide elected officials is a woman.
You graced the Board of Supervisors by claiming that that's a thermometer of the success of women. Women in business, though, how do you rate, how do your members talk about how things are in the workplace in this progressive Bay Area?
Oh, I think you're right that it's some good and some bad. I don't think that our members would say that it's particularly bad in the Bay Area. I actually think that women have it much better in the Bay Area than they do in other places in the country. There's still lots of places that we can go, though. Sexual harassment is still a problem no matter where you go.
You mean in the workplace?
In the workplace, absolutely.
With all the laws that are in the books?
Yeah, yeah. Well, you can't
and
legislate.
corporations being so sensitive to lawsuits, having suffered so many lawsuits?
You can't legislate people's behavior. You can't pass a law and immediately change people's behavior. It has to be a cultural shift.
When they issue work rules, you know, proper behavior, and the corporations are hiring these ethics professors to write them, there's a protocol and etiquette that's just trying to be mandated.
Mm-hmm.
Now, what do you think of that? What happens to that part that you're talking about, the part you can't control, when you have a whole group of ethical standards and techniques that you have to follow, basically so the corporation doesn't get sued?
I think work rules and protocols are a really good first step. You know, they educate the managers as to, you know, what is acceptable and what isn't acceptable. Then it's up to the managers and the corporations, specifically their HR directors, to come in and educate the employees about what's acceptable and what isn't. And essentially, it's a constant re-education of folks, I think.
Okay, now, do you think that's a responsibility of the fact that a lot of the organizations in the women's movement have been successful with a lot of apparent changes, and that you've lost a little bit of your zeal?
I actually don't think that the changes in work rules have as much to do with the success of women's organizations. I think it has more to do with laws that have been passed over the last several decades and lawsuits that have been brought under those statutes. The women's organizations, especially locally, are focused more on, I think, political advocacy about other issues, not necessarily workplace enforcement, but you know, and getting more women elected to public office, because that is something that my organization has focused on more, is actually volunteering for campaigns for female candidates.
I think you endorsed me when I ran for the Central Committee. I was one of the few that I think got your endorsement.
It wouldn't have been us because we don't endorse men.
Oh.
Well, unless it was several years ago.
It was several years ago.
Yeah. NWPC San Francisco got into some trouble last year with our national organization because we were endorsing men who endorse feminist principles. And our national organization doesn't.
So this is why you brought up the Board of Supervisors then. It is a thermometer for you.
It is, absolutely.
Especially in district elections.
Yeah, that's right.
You know, one of the things I'm kind of curious about, and I asked the crew this indirectly, there's another level beyond the legislative and the legal. It's the relationships between men and women in the day-to-day in various formats in the city and the Bay Area. Do you think there were changes made as a result of all the activism of the initial feminist movement? Or do you think men still treat women and women still see men in pretty much the same way?
Oh, I think that the feminist movement in the 60s and 70s changed a lot of people's minds, even women's minds, about how they should be treated and how men should treat women and how women should, the esteem that women should hold themselves in. And I think that it was because of that women's movement that the federal government and the state government enacted a lot of feminist legislation, legislation that would protect women from harassment in particular, and protect women from any other kind of sex-based discrimination.
I agree at that level, but even within the political organizations of San Francisco, not necessarily just the board. We have 2 senators that are women. Senator Migden also is in the state senate. When you survey the amount of success within the grassroots organization, how does it look there as well? Do we have a nice even balance? Is it irrelevant? Is gender irrelevant?
I can't wait for the day that I can say that gender is irrelevant, that women and men are treated equally. I think that locally we could be doing a whole lot better, the women's grassroots organizations. So I ran for supervisor last year,
yes, you did.
I was shocked that when I started running and thinking about who the women's organizations were that I could rally to my side, I actually didn't know a lot of the leadership in the feminist movement in San Francisco. And I'm president of the National Women's Political Caucus. You would think that we would have all networked with each other, at least known who each other is.
Mm-hmm.
And so this inspired me to put together a women's policy summit that we're holding this September at the Merchants Exchange building to bring together leaders of the women's movement, also so heads of organizations, but also elected officials, to talk about what we can be doing to coordinate our efforts and come up with an agenda for the next several years.
What do you think are the top 3 issues that you would advocate for at that summit?
The summit, I actually have tried to remain as neutral as possible. I'm bringing the summit together in order to hear
your personal issues. Then,
yeah, my
Alix,
personal issues.
Yeah, we've been skirting around it. What are the three areas that you're particularly concerned about that really need attention?
My personal issues, the first is probably universal preschool. We've got universal health care, or at least we're working on it. It's on its way. But getting some kind of universal child care for San Francisco residents, I think, will empower the women who would normally take care of these children during the day to actually get jobs, be fully employed. It really would be a feminist piece of legislation in order to enable women to do that. I think there are lots and lots of sex worker rights issues that are going on, very controversial. There's lots of women's groups who are up in arms about it. The Commission on the Status of Women was recommending some legislation recently that would ban private rooms in the clubs.
Does that really solve the problem?
Well, I think it's an extremely sticky issue. I don't think it solves the problem. If the problem is sexual assault in the private rooms, there's lots of ways around. There's lots of ways to attack that issue other than getting rid of the private rooms. The problem with eliminating private rooms is this is where a lot of the sex workers make their money. This is where their big tips come in.
That's my point.
And
it's
they're
a
out.
business.
Yeah, that's right. And some of the sex workers out there are outraged.
Then do you try to outreach to them about what's going on? Isn't that the source? They're not like victims in the sense that they can't make a decision. Unlike your other issues you brought up, for example, a mother who can't work because of a lack of funds for preschool. That's a little bit different.
Right.
So
the sex worker groups.
I don't want to spend a lot of time on this.
Right.
I'd like to get to your third. Let's get to your third. If you had to choose a third, and you don't campaign focus, campaign focus. The third one's always the most difficult when campaigns set out their initiatives. So if you had to choose a third issue, that's really bugging you.
I think making sure that the city's universal health care legislation is that the details of it are worked out to protect women. I know that a lot of the details haven't been worked out. I know that some of the unions, particularly the unions that are heavy on women, like Local 2, which is hotel workers, want to make sure that the universal health care is protecting women adequately. Like, for example, does it cover contraception? Does it cover, what kinds of reproductive services does it cover? Those are going to be very controversial.
At this point, is it more of a catastrophic form of health insurance where it only handles major injuries in other words, with a huge deductible, so that those kinds of procedures fall into that $2,000 deductible, $5,000 deductible, which I have a $5,000. It's really catastrophic. It's only if something serious happens. I haven't looked at legislation, but I'm wondering if that's what they've proposed. Possible, huh?
I don't know. I don't know.
I think it probably is. So you're saying that's what you're concerned about is
Yeah.
some of the fees for lesser procedures
Right.
might not be covered. Are you at the table?
Sometimes yes and sometimes no. I think we could be at the table more often than we are. When I ran for supervisor, I was watching in admiration the gay rights community. The advocacy community for gay rights is really, really effective. When something happens, some homophobic act happens, the gay rights community, the advocates, and the elected officials get together and they'll hold a press conference and they'll say this is not acceptable. Whereas, by comparison, last year, you remember Julie Lee I think she was the interim director of the Department of Building Services, or Building Inspection, and a member of the public came up and accused her of having pregnancy brain, and she later sued. But where were the feminist rights groups?
You answered that question. I mean, it's not just that. For example, CAR, or the Muslim activist group, is there within 24 hours.
Right.
La Raza is there within 24 hours. I disagree with them both, but I admire their ability to react with some kind of spin for something I could never spin. They managed to come up with something.
Right.
And
that's
the
right.
point, but is it possible that it's because the women's movement has been so successful, it doesn't have that passion that some of these other
No, absolutely
then what happened? Then why isn't
nobody stood up for Julie Lee. Nobody stood up for her.
did Alix Rosenthal?
I'm sorry, it's not Julie Lee. It's Amy Lee.
Yeah,
Amy Lee. Nobody stood up for her, and I didn't. The presidents of the women's organizations didn't, and that's something that was instructive to me. I think all of us thought that someone else would be doing it.
yeah, but that's part of what happens when you become, I think, successful. You just don't have that zeal. Imagine if it happened about 15 years ago or 20 years ago. There would be a response. I mean, for someone in public to say what was said, and what did he say? She had some.
She should not be named permanent director because she has pregnancy brain.
I assure you, 15 or 20 years ago, there would be 25 women down where that individual is located.
Holding a press conference,
Yeah,
drawing lots
yeah.
of attention to it, letters to the editor.
No, just being angry.
Yeah.
So I don't think, anyway, I want to go on to another final issue as we get last minute.
Okay.
Hillary Clinton, how important is it that she get, what would that do to the kinds of issues you're concerned about?
It's about time we have a woman president.
What would it do with the kinds of issues that you're concerned about?
She is going to surround herself by smart women in the White House. She's going to appoint more women to the federal bench. She's going to, I'm confident that she's going to bring women to the table in places where they aren't currently. And that is important enough for me.
Okay. Alix Rosenthal, thank you for being with us.
Thank you.
I enjoyed it. And stay with us. We'll be right back.